You don't plan your own birthday unless you're a little optimistic or a little naive. I was both. 3 weeks out, I sat at the kitchen table with coffee going cold and restaurant tabs open like I was scheduling a red carpet premiere. Marcello's warm lights, real breadsticks, a Chianti list that didn't require a second mortgage. It felt right, simple, celebratory mine. I drafted the message like it mattered, which to me it did. Not too eager, not too vague. Hey everyone, birthday dinner at Marcello's on Saturday the 18th, 7:00 p.m. Would love to see you there. I hit send and stared at the screen like it might pat me on the back. Replies trickled in on cue. Mom sounds lovely, sweetheart. Dad, looking forward to it, son. My brother Ryan, a thumbs up emoji. Ryan has never been efficient at anything, so that quick little icon should have warned me. It didn't. I wanted to believe. At home, the plan slotted neatly into the color-coded calendar Julia and I share. She knew the details before I did. Her phone chirps for every appointment from oil changes to parent-teacher conferences. She smiled, said she'd call the bakery about the cake I liked, and even asked about sparkler candles. Our daughter Sophie, 16 and professionally unimpressed by everything I do, glanced up from her phone long enough to say, "That sounds nice, Dad. If you translate teenager, that's a standing ovation." All week I hummed in the shower, let a colleague cut in line at the coffee machine, and actually waved back at neighbors who never wave first. I pictured the table for 8, the awkward song that always drags on one verse too long, the quiet luck of having your people around you while a small flame makes a small wish feel legitimate. And then the red flag walked in wearing Ryan's shoes. 2 weeks after my invite went out, we were at Mom's for a Sunday pot roast that could survive the apocalypse. Family everywhere, the TV on something nobody was watching, spoons clattering the whole domestic soundtrack. Ryan breezed in with a 12-pack like he was blessing the house. Mom lit up. He kissed her cheek, cracked a beer, and cleared his throat like a politician. "Got some news," he announced. "I'm throwing a party. Massive barbecue. Next Saturday." I felt my mouth go dry. "Which Saturday?" "The 18th, he said, grinning. "Riverside Park Pavilion. Caterer the whole 9. "The 18th is my birthday," I said, careful, calm, like picking up a glass I wasn't sure was cracked. "Dinner at Marcello's. I sent the invites 2 weeks ago." He made an innocent face worthy of an award. "Oh, right. It's just a barbecue, man. Lighten up. Lighten up." People say that when they know they're stepping on your foot and want you to apologize for having toes. Mom clasped her hands, already picturing picnic tables. "Ryan, that sounds wonderful." Dad shifted in his recliner. "Your brother's got something planned," he offered, the closest he ever comes to drawing a line. Ryan had momentum, and once he gets that, he surfs it. "We haven't had a real family get-together in ages," he said, eyes on Dad. "Like when we were kids, football in the grass, everyone laughing. That did it." Nostalgia rewired the room. Dad went soft around the edges. Mom started listing cousins. The group chat lit up like fireworks. The word thoughtful floated through the conversation, and I watched it land on Ryan like a sash. I tried to keep my voice level. People already committed to my dinner. Committed. Ryan laughed, the short, sharp version I've always hated. "It's not a wedding, it's just dinner." No one said the obvious, that just dinner was the one thing I'd asked for, the one night set aside for me. Julia spoke up at last, her tone steady but her eyes calculating. "We'll still come to your dinner," she said to me. She said it the way people say, "We'll still do that 8 a.m. training." Sophie scrolled, not looking up. I sat with my fork suspended over pot roast and watched it happen, a pivot executed in real time. Ryan had waited exactly the right amount of time, long enough that everyone knew about my dinner, not long enough that they felt bound to it. His event was bigger, louder, easier to say yes to. He'd booked a venue that could hold the entire family tree and half the zip code. Suddenly, the thing I'd planned was the alternative. The applause was for the barbecue. I drove home that night in a silence so loud I heard the turn signal click like a metronome. Julia talked about the week ahead. I said, at the right moments, and tried not to pull the car over just to breathe. The week of my birthday arrived anyway because time doesn't ask permission to keep moving. I cleaned the house like company was coming because it was supposed to. After dinner, we'd have cake at home, the chocolate tower from Julia's favorite bakery, the one that charges luxury prices for flour and sugar. I told myself that's what generosity looks like, not desperation. At 6:00 p.m., I put on the navy button-down Julia says makes my eyes look bluer than they are. I checked the mirror, checked my watch, checked my phone. Reservation at 7:00. In my family, that means 7:15 minimum. I drove to Marcello's with my heart trying to walk out ahead of me. The host smiled at party of 8 and led me to a window table where the city slid by in soft reflections. I set my phone face down, then face up, then face down because superstition is just anxiety wearing cologne. 7:15 became 7:30. Water glasses refilled. The waiter Giovanni, according to the tag, offered gentle optimism. Perhaps the others are parking, I said. Probably, and watched the door. At 7:45, I was still watching when the first guests arrived. Not family colleagues. Jim from accounting, cheerful and overdressed. Sarah from HR apologizing for the bottle of wine she'd grabbed at a gas station. The Hendersons from next door arrived too, doing that married couple telepathy that says, "We're worried for you," without saying anything at all. They looked around at the empty chairs and didn't ask questions. "We're so glad to be here," Sarah said, and I believed her. "Where's everyone else?" Jim asked, and I pretended not to hear. "We ordered appetizers because that's what you do when you're stalling for hope." I told a story about a project at work because people need material for small talk. Jim told his Little League saga because he always does. I laughed at the right parts and hated myself a little for being grateful to them for showing up. 8:30 came with a cake I had prepaid for. The sparklers hissed and sputtered and looked festive in the way fireworks always look festive no matter what they're celebrating or hiding. The song was awkward and off-key, and for a moment I thought about wishing for a time machine. Instead, I wished for whatever people wish for when the thing they wanted most was ordinary and they didn't get ordinary. I blew out the candles. Applause fluttered like a wounded bird and fell quiet. The empty chairs were still empty. Mom's chair, Dad's, Julia's, Sophie's, Ryan's. Giovanni set dessert plates with an earnest gentleness that felt like mercy. The cake was excellent. I tasted salt and couldn't tell if it was caramel or me. My phone, which had been stubbornly well-behaved all evening, woke up. A buzz, then a second, then a steady, insistent vibration that made the fork rattle on the white tablecloth. I turned it over. 52 missed calls, all from Julia. For a second, everything froze, the candles, the chatter, the music from the speakers. 52 is not running late. 52 is not sorry traffic. 52 is alarm bells, a fire, an ambulance, the end of the world. "Everything okay?" Sarah asked softly. "Sure," I said, and even I could hear how unconvincing it was. The phone buzzed again, call number 53, and Julia's smiling contact photo filled the screen, a picture from our last anniversary where we were both pretending to be the kind of couple who doesn't miss birthdays. I watched it ring. I did not answer. I don't know if that makes me the villain in someone else's story. I know what it made me in mine, finally still. The call went to voicemail. A second later, a third buzz, another message deposited into the growing stack. The table looked at me without looking. I cut another slice of cake, the chocolate dense and expensive, and I tasted it like a dare. Somewhere across town, my brother's brand new barbecue was going off script. Somewhere the people who had traded my dinner for sparklers in a park were discovering that a plan without a foundation collapses under its own decorations. Somewhere Julia, the person who shares my calendar and my house and my life, was calling because she needed the one thing I've always been asked to provide rescue. And me, I sat at Marcello's under warm lights, surrounded by the handful of people who had chosen to be there, and I smiled in a way that felt strange at first, and then started to feel like my face might remember how to do it on its own. I didn't know the details yet. I didn't know about the broken catering truck or the disappearing guests, or the rising panic. All I knew was this: the room was full of empty chairs, and somehow I didn't feel empty anymore. That was the last quiet moment before the rest of the story began. The thing about birthdays is you only get one shot each year. One night, one dinner, one candle-blown promise to yourself that maybe people see you, maybe you matter. But 2 weeks after my careful invite, Ryan had hijacked that shot. He made it a carnival ride complete with fireworks and catering trucks. At first, I tried to ignore the knot in my stomach. Maybe people would choose my dinner over his barbecue. Maybe blood loyalty would trump spectacle. But families have a funny way of showing you the truth you've been ignoring for years. I should have known when Mom's eyes sparkled brighter at Ryan's announcement than they ever had at my successes. When Dad's half-hearted objection crumbled the second Ryan mentioned old football games in the park. When Julia, my wife, gave me a smile that wasn't a smile at all, more like a mask-covering calculation. She promised we'd still come to my dinner, but her tone said she was already packing a lawn chair for Riverside Park. The week leading up to the 18th dragged like wet cement. Julia stayed busy texting Ryan about logistics. Sophie, our daughter, posted on her Instagram story about Uncle Ryan's epic barbecue, 3 fire emojis like it was a music festival. Mom called me one evening not to ask about my birthday plans, but to gush about how thoughtful Ryan was renting an entire pavilion so the whole family could finally be together. My dinner reduced to background noise. I told myself it didn't matter. I'd still have my night. Even if it was just Julia, Sophie, and me, I'd light the sparkler candles and taste the cake. We'd come back home afterward, laugh, maybe open a bottle of wine, maybe just sit on the couch and feel like a family. That's what I kept repeating to myself. That's how you survive hope you tell yourself lies and pray they turn true. But Saturday came and the truth rolled in like storm clouds. By 7:45, Marcelo's table for 8 still had 7 empty chairs. Julia wasn't answering. Sophie wasn't answering. My parents weren't answering. Ryan sure as hell wasn't answering. I sat there while my colleagues and neighbors filled the silence with polite conversation. The candles hissed, the cake looked beautiful, and I cut it like it was any other Saturday night dessert. And then came Julia's calls. 1 missed call, then 10, then 20, then 52 by the time I finally flipped the phone over. Her face filled the screen over and over again, begging me silently to pick up. And for the first time in our marriage, I didn't. That night ended with polite applause for the cake, some hugs from neighbors who weren't sure what to say, and me driving home with the boxed leftovers on the passenger seat, the candles already cold. I walked into an empty house, set the cake on the counter, and stared at the neat white frosting. Happy birthday written for nobody. The next morning I made coffee and finally pressed play on Julia's voicemails. The first one was cheerful, her voice pitched high, trying too hard. Hey, honey, sorry I missed your call earlier. Ryan's party is going great. Everyone's asking about you. Call me back when you get this. Love you. Love me. She said it like a reflex, not like a truth. The next few messages cracked around the edges. So listen, we have a tiny situation here. The catering truck broke down. People are starting to get hungry. Could you maybe call that taco guy, Miguel just... Please call me back. By voicemail 7, her calm was gone. Panic dripped from every syllable. This is bad. Really bad. There are 60 people here and no food. Your mom is asking where you are. I told them you'd fix it. Please, I need you. There it was. My role exposed in plain words. Not husband, not father, not son, fixer. The guy who patches everyone else's holes so the ship doesn't sink. By message 12, she snapped, "You always know what to do. You always fix everything. Stop being petty and answer the phone." I sat there with my coffee listening to desperation turn into blame. Julia weaponized Sophie's name by voicemail 30. When Sophie asks why her dad couldn't help his family, I'll tell her the truth that you were too childish to let go of one dinner. A birthday dinner. My birthday dinner, reduced to one dinner in her mouth. By message 47, she was crying. I feel like the worst wife in the world. Everyone's looking at me for answers, and I can't explain why you won't help. Please. Please. I should have felt pity. I should have wanted to call her back, save her, save Ryan, save Mom's pride. But what I felt was clarity. When people panic, the masks slip. They don't craft careful words or sugarcoat truths. They tell you exactly what you are to them. In Julia's panicked messages, I wasn't a partner. I wasn't the man she was supposed to celebrate that night. I was the emergency contact, the human Swiss Army knife, reliable, useful, invisible. And then Mom posted on Facebook, "So proud of my Ryan for organizing such a lovely gathering. Even though the food truck broke down, everyone pulled together to make it special. Wish our other son could have been there to help out." I'm sure he had his reasons. Family is everything. Wish our other son could have been there to help out. Not celebrate, not be honored. Help. That single word cut deeper than all of Julia's messages combined. I screenshotted it. I screenshotted Sophie's Instagram stories too. Uncle Ryan's party is lit then later. Why is the food truck broken though? Evidence stacked in a folder on my laptop. Screenshots, voicemails, receipts all neatly filed under one name for later. Because in that moment, I understood something I'd ignored for years. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't thoughtlessness. It wasn't poor planning. It was a pattern, a system. Ryan was the golden boy. Mom and Dad orbited his chaos like it was sunlight. Julia, my wife, had slipped into that orbit too. Sophie adored the fun uncle more than the boring dad. And me, I was the gravity keeping it all from flying apart unnoticed until the second I stopped holding steady. That morning, I didn't rage. I didn't throw my phone. I didn't storm into Ryan's house demanding an apology. Instead, I did what I do best. I documented. I organized. And for the first time in my life, I started thinking about what revenge looks like when it's done quietly, patiently, with receipts. The candles on my cake had burned out, but somewhere in me a different fire started. When I was a kid, I thought fairness was automatic. Same parents, same roof, same rules. If I worked hard, I'd be noticed. If I did well, I'd be praised. That's what I believed. But Ryan's existence taught me otherwise. The pattern started early, like a song you can't stop hearing once you know the melody. Ryan took his first steps at 9 months. Mom and Dad acted like he'd just been nominated for sainthood. They told the story for years. Ryan was walking before his first birthday, such a prodigy. Meanwhile, I'd been walking for 2 years already. No parades, no applause. My milestones were simply expected. Ryan's were headline news. High school told the same story. Ryan barely graduated, needed summer school just to scrape by. Mom threw him a party with balloons, banners, relatives cheering like he'd been accepted to Harvard. When I graduated 3 years earlier as valedictorian, we went to Applebee's. No decorations, no speeches, just an appetizer sampler and Dad saying, "Good job, son," before turning back to his steak. Ryan went to college, lasted 2 semesters, then declared he needed to find himself. Translation. Dad funded a 6-month trip through Europe. He came back with a questionable tattoo, a few stories about bars in Prague, and an accent that lasted exactly 3 weeks. They called it a vision quest. Meanwhile, I worked 2 part-time jobs, paid my own tuition, made dean's list every semester, and graduated with honors. No Europe, no tattoo, no party, just me, ramen noodles, and a handshake. By then, the script was set in stone. Ryan failed. They applauded his courage. I succeeded. They nodded and moved on. His business venture's a comedy act if they weren't so expensive. The first was a food truck. He and a buddy thought they'd get rich selling fusion tacos. 6 months later, the truck was parked in Dad's driveway, unpaid bills stacked on the dashboard. Who do you think sorted through them, me? 3 weekends wasted on tax forms and invoices while Ryan recovered from burnout at happy hours. Second venture, a landscaping company with his high school friend Jake. Their slogan might as well have been, "We show up when we feel like it." They killed more grass than they planted, left clients furious, and wound up in small claims court. Dad called me in to fix the mess. I paid for the lawyer myself. Ryan promised to pay me back next month. Next month never came. The third, he decided to be a social media influencer, bought cameras, lights, and branded himself as the real Ryan J. He filmed 17 videos of himself ranting about sports and eating cereal. They got fewer views than a test pattern at 3 a.m., but Mom shared every video on Facebook like he was conquering Hollywood. "So proud of my creative son," she'd write. When I landed my first real financial planning client, not a word. Even Julia, my wife, slid into the same rhythm. At first, she loved my stability. She said I was dependable, the grown-up who balanced her impulsiveness. But stability slowly transformed into boring, reliability into predictable. She laughed harder at Ryan's reckless stories than at any joke I ever told. She called his chaos adventurous. She started looking at him with the same admiration Mom and Dad had reserved for him my whole life. And Sophie, well, teenagers love fun. Ryan was the fun uncle with inappropriate jokes and gifts I'd never approve of. He didn't care about rules, homework, or curfews. To her, I was just the guy who said no. He was the guy who said, why not? I became the shadow, standing next to his spotlight. The truth landed heavy one night as I sat alone in the living room listening to Julia's voicemails again. Not because I needed to, because I wanted the reminder. Her panic wasn't about me. It was about appearances, about Ryan's barbecue collapsing and her looking bad by association. That's what I was to all of them. Not a man, not someone worth celebrating, a safety net, the foundation, the guy you don't see until he's gone. I looked around my house, our house, the tidy living room Julia had decorated, the calendar with Sophie's activities highlighted in pink, the couch where I'd once pictured family movie nights, game nights, candles on birthdays, and I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. Invisible when I succeeded, indispensable when they failed. That clarity should have broken me. Instead, it sparked something else. A question that buzzed in my head louder than Julia's 52 missed calls. What if I stopped catching them? What if I stopped answering? What if I let Ryan's disasters be? Ryan's disasters. What if I let Julia face her choices without me covering the fallout? What if Mom and Dad had to watch their golden boy flounder without their reliable son there to sweep the floor behind him? For years I thought silence was weakness. But maybe silence could be strength. Maybe not answering the phone was louder than all the speeches I'd never been allowed to make. That thought settled into me like a stone in a riverbed, solid, unmoving, waiting. I didn't know yet how far I'd take it. I didn't know that one day I'd sit in my backyard with a beer watching my entire family's carefully built illusions collapse in real time. All I knew then was this: I was done being their foundation. And once a foundation crumbles, everything on top eventually falls. The morning after my empty birthday dinner, I made coffee strong enough to stand up on its own and pressed play. One voicemail, then another, then the whole flood all the way from cheerful to panicked to angry to pleading. I listened without rushing as if I were auditing a file at work. When people are calm, they curate. When they're desperate, they confess. Julia's messages confessed everything: my role as fixer, my expected availability, my replaceable place in a family that remembered me when something broke. I opened my laptop and began to label. Voicemail, Wassens, me, cheerful, voicemail 7, panic, voicemail 12, demand, voicemail 25, guilt. Voicemail 47, tears. I saved the audio. Then the transcripts backed them up to a cloud drive and mirrored the folder on a portable SSD. Not because I planned to weaponize them that minute, but because truth is fragile when it lives only in memory. Next came screenshots. Julia's smiling post. Family fun time time-stamped exactly when my waiter was refilling my water for the 4th time. Sophie's story, Uncle Ryan's party, is going to be lit, then later the empty buffet with the caption, "Why is the food truck broken, though?" Mom's long Facebook paragraph, the one that should be framed in a museum under Real Priorities 21st Century. So proud of my Ryan. Wish our other son could have been there to help out. Family is everything. Not celebrate. Help out. I highlighted those 2 words like an attorney marking exhibits A and B. I added the dinner receipt, $347 for a table of 5 that was supposed to be 8, plus the bakery invoice for the chocolate monument that came home in a box, paper and pixels, dates and times, cause and effect. I named the master folder for later and felt something shift inside me, small but undeniable, like a lock turning. Then I went very, very quiet. Silence unnerves people who are used to your yes. For weeks I moved through the house like a ghost with boundaries. Julia made breakfast and talked about errands. I smiled, said I had early calls. Sophie asked for a ride at the last second. I said I had a client Zoom and suggested the bus. Mom phoned 3 days after my birthday not to apologize, but to narrate Ryan's wonderful party and the unfortunate food situation. She ended with, "You would have been proud of your brother." I said I'm sure and let the pause do the rest. Dad's contribution when I saw him that weekend was a clap on the shoulder and, "You understand how it is when family needs you." I said I do, and watched the words bounce off the wall he'd built between understanding me and using me. Julia never said, "I'm sorry I missed your birthday." She drifted around the subject like a boat around a sandbar she knew would rip open the hull. Instead, she leaned into normal. "We should try that new Thai place. Sophie's practice changed times. Don't forget the pest control renewal." When she finally mentioned the disaster at Riverside Park, it was framed like weather. Unlucky truck. Bad timing. Everyone pitched in. I nodded and counted the beats in my head between her sentences. She was waiting for me to offer forgiveness without her asking for it. I didn't offer. I also didn't fight. I learned the difference between sulking and strategy. Sulking begs for attention. Strategy sits very still and gathers information. Work gave me cover. It wasn't an act. My practice really was growing. One referral became three. Three turned into a new segment of clients who needed restructuring after Windfall's exits messy tax seasons. People who valued what I do because it saves or makes them real money are refreshingly clear. They show up on time. They read documents. They say thank you. The Morrison portfolio came in first complex, interesting high trust, then Pritchard, then the Westfield Development Group. Late nights didn't feel like sacrifice. They felt like sanity. "Good for you," Julia said, scrolling her phone. "Also, Ryan's thinking about launching something new. Maybe you could help him with the numbers." There it was again, useful, not admirable. A resource, not a person. I started keeping a second notebook, the kind with a hard cover that survives backpacks and rain. On the first page, I wrote patterns. Below it, I listed moments I would have forgotten or rationalized: Mom calling me only to ask for tech help, Dad praising Ryan's initiative after he'd made another mess, Julia laughing at Ryan's stories, then rolling her eyes when I suggested planning ahead for Sophie's expenses, Sophie asking me to be cool when I set a curfew, then texting her uncle heart emojis when he dropped off concert tickets I hadn't approved. I wasn't building a grievance list. I was measuring gravity. What pulls whom? What they expect. What I allow. Small changes followed. When Julia asked me to pick up dry cleaning she needed now, I discovered I had back-to-back calls until 5. When Mom asked if I could come by to fix Dad's computer real quick, I recommended a local repair shop that was fast and fair. When Ryan texted, "Yo man, can I pick your brain about a brand idea?" I replied, "Send a brief and your availability for a call. My consulting rate is attached." He sent back a string of laughing emojis, and then nothing at all. Meanwhile, I strengthened relationships that were built on reciprocity. Miguel, the taco truck owner I'd helped through a loan application after his first rig was totaled, sent me photos of his new truck, all chrome and pride. We grabbed coffee in the lot one afternoon, and I asked about his industry, who shows up on time, which caterers can pivot, which venues treat vendors well, which planners are honest with budgets. He talked. I listened. By the end, I had names, numbers, and a web of people who answer calls because they remember who answered theirs. It wasn't a revenge board, not yet. It was a map of competence. At home, the gaslighting turned from thick to thin the way a fog thins when the sun decides to do its job. Julia sensed the distance and named it work stress. I let her. Sophie said I'd been kinda icy lately. I told her I loved her and that boundaries sometimes sound cold to people who prefer easy. She rolled her eyes and asked for $20. I gave her 10 and a ride, then set a time to pick her up and actually arrived at that time. Consistency is a strange teacher. It teaches you about yourself before anyone else catches on. I kept adding to "for later." Mom's proud of my Ryan comments. Dad's maybe next time he'll prioritize family. Julia's group photos from weekly gatherings where I was noticeably absent and nobody asked why. Sophie's stories harmless on the surface, but each one a bead on a string that spelled fun with Uncle Ryan while I was out front, the boring lamppost keeping the street lit. I didn't brood over the files. I just kept them current like statements you reconcile at month's end. About 8 weeks after the birthday, that wasn't the family group text, pinged with a familiar fanfare, Ryan had an announcement. The thread chimed alive Mom's hearts, Dad's thumbs-up cousins spilling in from everywhere. Family Barbecue 2.0, Ryan wrote. Go big or go home. Lake Harmony Lodge. Live band. Catered. Activities for the kids. Open bar. Saturday, August 15th. Save the date. Photos rolled in scouted views of the lake, a pavilion draped in string light sample menus with names like Smoked Heaven and Carolina Dream. Julia texted, can't wait. Sophie added, this is going to be insane, Mom. So proud of my boy for bringing us all together again. Dad, about time we did something right. I stared at the screen and felt nothing like rage. It was cleaner than that. It was the steadiness I feel when numbers balance. A problem statement had presented itself. The variables were known. The system once understood is predictable. Here was the pattern in bolder type. Ryan plans loud, spends money he doesn't have, invites, everyone expects applause, and assumes that if anything goes wrong, I will appear with a clipboard and a solution. Mom will praise, Dad will rationalize, Julia will manage optics, Sophie will post. Here was the counter pattern I had been sketching. I do not rescue, I do not argue, I do not warn, I document, I position, I let consequences walk in on their own 2 feet while I hold the door and say nothing. I looked at the calendar. Saturday, August 15th, 1 year and 3 weeks after the night they chose spectacle over me. 5 weeks away. Plenty of time. I started quietly. Not with a manifesto, not with a confrontation, not with a public scene I'd regret. I drafted a clean, factual timeline of last year's events. I attached the screenshots, the voicemail transcripts, the timestamps, Mom's post, Dad's comment, Sophie's stories, the receipt from Marcelo's, the bakery invoice. Then I created 3 versions of a cover note. Version A, professional context. For clients and colleagues who had become friends, the ones who understand patterns, reputation, and why trust matters. Version B, community context. For neighbors and mutuals who attend the same events, polite, succinct, not salacious, just clarifying. Version C, family context. For extended relatives, the ones who only hear the Golden Boy highlight reel and wonder why I'm distant lately, I did not send anything. Not yet. Drafting is not detonating. Drafting is preparing the parachute and checking the ripcord twice. Then I made calls that weren't about anyone's feelings, a planner I'd met through a client's gala, 2 caterers Miguel vouched for, a venue coordinator who appreciated straightforward questions. I wasn't trying to sabotage Ryan's event. I was attempting something simpler and more ruthless to ensure that when reality arrived, as it always does, it would be wide awake, well-documented, and perfectly timed. You planning something big? Miguel asked with a grin, handing me a paper bag of tacos he refused to let me pay for. Planning to stop saving people from themselves, I said. He nodded like a man who has learned that lesson the hard way. That's big enough. Back home, Julia floated an idea over dinner. Maybe you could look over Ryan's budget for the lodge just to make sure he's not missing anything major. I took a sip of water. Send me his spreadsheet and I'll send a quote for my time. She blinked. He's family. So am I said, and let the sentence sit there until it drew its own outline. That night I backed up for later again, printed a hard copy of the timeline, and sealed it in a folder in my desk labeled, "In Case of Gaslight." I slept well. Days passed. The group thread thrummed with plans. People tagged each other in lakeside photo ideas. Mom asked about centerpieces. Dad offered to bring a few cases like that would solve anything. Julia bought a sundress. Sophie picked a playlist. Ryan posted a countdown video full of grand declarations about togetherness. 5 days before the event, I looked at my drafts one more time, tightened 2 sentences, softened, one checked the attachments, and closed the laptop. You don't knock the first domino. You just set the table where it can't wobble and let gravity do its job. If the last year had taught me anything, it was this: I didn't need to shout to be heard. I didn't need to break anything to watch what was already cracked fall apart. I didn't need revenge to feel powerful. I needed clarity, patience, and proof. 5 days is a long time when a quiet fire is already lit. The calendar turned, and the week of Ryan's grand spectacle finally arrived. In the family chat, the anticipation was a parade. Mom posted a countdown meme every morning, day 4, day 3, like Ryan was launching a space shuttle. Dad contributed with his usual blunt wisdom: remember, it's about family, not perfection. Julia was already fussing over her outfit, asking Sophie if they should coordinate colors for photos. Sophie planned Instagram captions in advance. It was the same pattern as always. Ryan declared and everyone rallied. My silence didn't disturb them, not yet. Monday morning, I opened my laptop, took a deep breath, and sent 3 emails. Version A, version B, and version C. Not mass blasted, not public, just carefully chosen recipients. Colleagues who respect facts, neighbors who had seen the empty seats at my birthday dinner, relatives who'd swallowed the golden boy myth for too long. The subject line was quiet but sharp, sharing context. Inside were no rants, no accusations, no anger. Just evidence, screenshots, Julia's voicemails, Sophie's stories, Mom's Facebook post wishing her other son had been there to help out, Dad's comment about me prioritizing family next time. All laid out in a clean timeline with receipts, dates, and times. A family portrait painted in their own words. I hit send, then I shut the laptop. On Tuesday, Miguel texted. Heard some chatter about your brother's event. People asking questions. You good? I told him I was fine. I was better than fine. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing anyone. I wasn't cleaning up a mess. I wasn't explaining myself. I was simply waiting. By Wednesday, the first ripples surfaced. The Hendersons stopped Julia at the grocery store to ask if everything was okay between me and the rest of the family. A cousin emailed me privately. I had no idea. Thank you for showing me. Even the lodge coordinator posted a vague message about ensuring client transparency. The whispers were beginning, carried along not by me, but by the truth I'd finally let breathe. Thursday evening, Julia confronted me in the kitchen. Did you send something? Her tone wasn't curious. It was defensive brittle. Send what I asked, sipping my coffee. People are asking questions about last year, about your birthday, about us. I didn't say anything that wasn't true, I replied, which was the point. She stared at me, searching for the version of me she remembered, the man who would shrug, apologize, smooth it over. But he wasn't home anymore. She turned away, muttering, You're really going to ruin this family over a dinner. It wasn't a dinner, I said quietly. It was a message. And you all sent it loud and clear. I just turned up the volume. Friday morning, the real cracks appeared. A neighbor texted Julia canceling their RSVP for Ryan's party. Something came up, then another. By noon, Ryan had called me 6 times. I didn't answer. By evening, Mom left 3 voicemails in a row. Son, I don't know what's going on, but people are backing out of Ryan's event. He's devastated. Please call me back. This isn't you. No, Mom, it wasn't the old me. Saturday, the day of the event, arrived with a strange calm. I mowed my lawn. I brewed another pot of strong coffee. Then I carried a cooler to the backyard, cracked open a beer, and opened my laptop to a folder I had renamed overnight. Mission accomplished. At noon, Lake Harmony Lodge's Instagram account posted a cheerful welcome, excited to host the Johnson family today. Photos of decorated tables, a buffet lined with chafing dishes, string lights swaying over the lake. By 2:30, the post was gone. At 3:15, the lodge posted again, this time a generic lakeside shot with no mention of a specific event. By 3:30, my phone lit up like Christmas. Julia, Ryan, Mom, Dad, cousins, voicemails piling like snowdrifts. I didn't listen. Not yet. I let the panic collect itself. Miguel texted at 3:40. Your brother just canceled backup catering. Said circumstances changed. Whole vendor chat is laughing. At 3:47, Ryan posted to his own social media, "Due to unforeseen circumstances, today's event has been postponed. Thanks for understanding." Unforeseen circumstances. I nearly laughed. He had spent a year building this tower on sand, and I had simply stopped holding the walls up. Gravity did the rest. The comments poured in, some sympathetic, some skeptical, others sharp-pointed. "Hope everything's okay, though I heard there was drama about birthdays. Unforeseen or just consequences." One came from a client of mine who'd clearly received the package. By 4:00, my phone showed 37 missed calls. Julia alone had tried 14 times. Ryan 11. Mom 8. Even Dad, who usually communicates in grunts, had called 4 times. Call 38 was Sophie. For a moment, guilt tugged at me. 16 is too young to carry the weight of adult choices. But then I remembered her story, Uncle Ryan's party is going to be lit. Posted as I sat alone at Marcello's last year. Her call went unanswered. The voicemails stacked. Julia's first sounded fake calm. "Honey, there's a misunderstanding. Can you call me back?" Ryan's were blunt. "What did you do? People are leaving. The caterer's gone. Mom's crying." Dad's voice cracked on his, "I don't know what's happening, but your mother's beside herself. Please, son." And Mom, who had written that I should have been there to help out now, begged for me to help out. The masterpiece was Julia's voicemail number 43. "You're willing to humiliate us in front of everyone we know because we missed one dinner. This is cruel. This isn't the man I married. The man I married was better than this." She was right. The man she married would never have let them choke on their own choices. The man she married would have answered the 50-second call, fixed the problem, and swallowed his own pain for their comfort. But that man was gone. I sat in my backyard sunlight, fading another beer, sweating on the table beside me. I pulled out a slice of last year's birthday cake from the freezer, dense, sweet, imperfect. I ate it slowly while my phone buzzed and cried and pleaded on the patio table. I felt nothing sharp. Not rage, not gloating, not even triumph. Just a clean, quiet emptiness like the air after a storm. When the sun dipped below the trees, I turned my phone off and leaned back in my chair. For the first time in years, I wasn't the fixer, the foundation, the safety net. I wasn't the forgotten son or the boring husband. I was the man who had walked away, and I smiled. Not for them, for me. The weekend after Ryan's party collapsed, my house was strangely quiet. Not the kind of silence that feels lonely, but the kind that feels earned, like a room finally cleared of smoke. My phone, still off from Saturday evening, sat face down on the counter. By Sunday afternoon, when I turned it back on, the flood was waiting. 62 voicemails, dozens of texts, half apologies, half accusations, all of them desperate. I didn't press play right away. I let them sit like unopened bills. The first call I did take was from Sarah, the co-worker, who'd once brought gas station wine to my failed birthday dinner. She laughed softly. "You really did it, didn't you?" "I didn't do anything I said. I just stopped doing." Word had spread fast. By Monday morning, the Johnson family barbecue had become neighborhood gossip, then community folklore. People whispered about the canceled lodge party, the mysterious emails, the meltdown. Some sided with Ryan, painting him as unlucky. Others whispered the truth that consequences had simply arrived. Julia confronted me first. She came home Monday evening looking exhausted, her hair pulled back in a messy knot, her eyes ringed dark. "Do you know what you've done?" she asked, dropping her bag onto the couch. "Yes," I said calmly. "You humiliated us in front of everyone. The lodge, the neighbors, my parents' friends. Do you realize the damage?" I looked at her steady. Damage implies something was whole before. Julia, this family was never whole. You proved that last year. I just stopped pretending. Her face flushed with anger. It was one mistake. Missing your dinner was one mistake. I shook my head. It wasn't one mistake. It was a pattern. And you know it. The barbecue was just the proof. She had no answer for that. For once, Julia, who always had explanations, excuses, and quick pivots, stood silent. She went upstairs without another word. Ryan tried a different approach. He showed up at my office midweek, looking like someone who'd been through a storm without shelter. His shirt wrinkled, his voice hoarse, his charm cracked. "You really had to nuke me, huh?" he said, flopping into the chair opposite my desk. I didn't look up from my computer. "No one forced you to throw a party on my birthday last year. No one forced you to ignore my dinner. No one forced you to spend thousands on a lodge you couldn't afford. You did that." He leaned forward, jabbing a finger at me. "Family sticks together, that's the rule. You don't air dirty laundry to outsiders." I met his glare. Family sticks together. Unless it's my birthday, apparently. Then family chooses barbecue over me. And for the record, I didn't air anything false. Just the truth. If the truth burns your reputation, maybe you should look at your reputation. Ryan's mouth opened, then closed. He muttered something about betrayal and stormed out. For the first time in my life, I didn't chase after him. Mom called next. Her voice trembled with equal parts anger and hurt. "Why would you do this to us? To your brother, to me?" I almost laughed. "Why would I, Mom? I didn't throw a competing party on Ryan's birthday. I didn't post smiling photos while he sat alone. I didn't wish he could have been there to help out instead of celebrate. You all did that. I just stopped covering it up." There was a long pause. Then the inevitable, "You've always been so unforgiving." That one stung, but not for the reason she thought. I had been forgiving too, forgiving for decades. That forgiveness had calcified into invisibility. I'd been the fixer, the reliable son, the boring husband, the background character in my own life. And they had mistaken my patience for weakness. Dad never called. Not directly. He sent a short text late one night, "Son, I hope you know I love you. We'll talk when things calm down." I stared at the screen, then powered the phone off again. By Friday, the fallout had settled like ash after a fire. Ryan's reputation was scorched. The lodge refused to refund his deposit, citing contract violations. Vendors circulated his name as someone not to work with. Friends who once cheered his spontaneity began keeping their distance. Julia avoided me at home, moving through the kitchen and bedroom like a stranger. Sophie, caught between us, said little. She spent more time in her room, headphones on, eyes guarded. I knew she was angry, embarrassed, maybe even hurt. But I also knew she had seen the truth with her own eyes. Her uncle wasn't invincible, her mother wasn't always right, and her father wasn't as weak as everyone assumed. One evening, she surprised me. She appeared at the kitchen table, phone in hand, and said, "Dad, was it really that bad for you all these years?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and nodded. "Yes, but it won't be anymore." She didn't reply. But she didn't roll her eyes either. That was enough for me. Work carried on. Clients didn't care about my family drama. They cared about results. I delivered them. My business grew. My calendar filled with meetings where people valued my time, my advice, my judgment. I was finally surrounded by people who treated me the way I should have been treated at home. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to rub their noses in it. I had already won, not by destroying them, but by stepping out of their shadow. Months later, Mom tried to arrange a family dinner. "It's time to move past all this," she said. "Ryan's planning something smaller, just us." I declined, politely, firmly. "I don't need another performance, Mom, I'm done." That was the moment it became real. Not for them, for me. I wasn't waiting for apologies that would never come. I wasn't trying to prove myself to people who had already written their script. I wasn't going to let birthdays or any days be stolen from me again. I had walked away, and the path behind me could stay closed. That night, sitting in the quiet of my living room, I poured a drink and thought about the man I used to be. The one who begged for attention, who bent over backwards, who measured his worth by how much he fixed. That man was gone. The man left behind was different, stronger, clearer, and finally free. I raised my glass to no one in particular and whispered the only toast that mattered to me, and I smiled. The week after the lodge fiasco, The neighborhood gossip slowed to a murmur, then to the dull hum of life returning to normal. At least that's what it sounded like from my kitchen, where coffee hissed and the clock ticked, and the house finally felt like it belonged to the person paying the mortgage. I kept working, kept showing up for clients who valued certainty more than noise, and kept my phone face down unless it rang with a number I respected. On Wednesday, an email arrived from my aunt's subject line, "Photos from the lake, the ones that survived." She meant well. She always has. I almost deleted it. Curiosity won. I clicked. The album opened on smiling faces in front of string lights, kids skimming stones, the lake doing its best to make bad planning look picturesque. Then I stopped on a frame that tightened something in my chest I thought had already hardened. Ryan stood between my parents, his arm around Mom-Dad's hand on his shoulder. He was grinning, dressed like he'd borrowed the idea of adulthood for the afternoon. On his wrist, catching the evening light, sat a watch I knew better than my own reflection. Granddad's Omega, the one Dad had cleaned twice a year. The one he told me when I was 12 and memorizing the shape of responsibility would be mine on my 40th. "You'll appreciate what it means," he said back then, turning it over in his palm. "You'll keep it running." I stared at the photo until the screen dimmed and the mouse woke it again. There was no caption. There didn't need to be. The title I'd heard my whole life, "Meant for You," had finally been edited, and not by mistake. I closed the laptop and sat very still. Not angry, not even surprised. Just steadied by the way patterns keep their promises. That night, I drove to my parents' house. No warning, no speech rehearsed. The porch light was on because it's always on, as if illumination could substitute for insight. Mom opened the door and folded me into a hug that had worried fingerprints on it. "We've been so concerned," she said into my shoulder. Inside, the living room wore the same furniture, same framed pictures, same old carpet that never quite admitted its age. Dad was in his chair, remote in hand TV on a sports channel he wasn't really watching. The Omega wasn't on his wrist. It didn't need to be. "I saw the photos," I said. Mom's smile faltered. Dad cleared his throat like a man preparing to make a small problem smaller. "Your grandfather would have wanted the watch worn," he said. "Your brother had a big day planned. It seemed appropriate." "Appropriate," I repeated, tasting the word he had chosen for so many of Ryan's shortcuts. "You told me it would be mine when I turned 40. We said we'd see Mom cut in quick, a seamstress trying to stitch a rip while the fabric keeps tearing. Nothing was set in stone. I watched them. Two people who loved their sons, just not the same way, and had never admitted it even to themselves. I could argue. I could list dates, promises, all the times I had been the quiet ledger while Ryan was the headline. Instead, I took the path I had already chosen. "Keep it," I said. Dad blinked. "What?" "The watch. Keep it. Consider it a perfect symbol. Heirlooms go to the story a family believes about itself. You've been telling the same story for a long time. I'm done editing it." Mom's eyes shone. "Don't be dramatic." "Nothing dramatic about acceptance," I said, and felt the truth snug into place like a well-cut joint. She reached for my arm. "We can fix this. We'll do a dinner. Just us. No big plans. Your brother will bring the watch and—" "No," I said gently. "You can have your dinners. I'm not applying for my old role." Dad set the remote down. The room clicked into a silence I hadn't heard there before. He studied me like a man realizing a machine he'd relied on was no longer under warranty. "You're really not coming back from this, are you?" "I am back," I said, standing, "just not where you left me." On the drive home, I felt lighter than I had after the lodge collapsed. Revenge is sharp, boundaries are clean, one punctures, the other keeps you from bleeding in the first place. Julia waited in the kitchen, a cup of tea going cold. She had watched me deteriorate for years without calling it by name. Now she watched me stabilize and didn't recognize the man standing in front of her. "How did it go?" she asked. "They gave Ryan the watch," I said. Dad said it felt appropriate. She flinched as if I'd tossed the Omega on the tile between us. "I didn't know." "Not your job to," I said. She set the cup down. "Are we okay? Honesty is a skill you either practice or avoid." "We're not what we were," I said. "And I can't go back to that." You chose a party over me. Then you chose optics over accountability. Maybe you didn't wake up and decide to do that. Maybe you slid into it. But I felt the fall. She folded her arms, defensive and small. I said I was sorry. You didn't, I said, and the quiet swallowed the room. You said it was one mistake. You said I was being cruel. You said I was destroying the family. You didn't say, I'm sorry I didn't show up for you. Julia looked down. When she spoke, her voice was softer. I am sorry. I hear it, I said. Now we decide what that means. What it meant for the next few months was an honest inventory. Two adults sitting at a table with a calendar and a notepad talking about counseling without using it as a threat. Talking about Sophie without turning her into a pawn, talking about money without dressing power up as practicality. It wasn't romantic. It was responsible. Some nights we were almost kind. Other nights we were business partners, dissolving an old venture while preserving the parts that still worked. Sophie, to her credit, watched without choosing sides out loud. She tested my new boundaries like a good scientist. When she was late, I didn't yell. I adjusted privileges. When she asked for something last minute, I asked her what her plan was when the answer was no. She didn't like it. She understood it. One afternoon, she texted from school. Are you coming to the fall concert? I wrote back. If you want me there, I'll be there. No lecture. No guilt. She sent a single word. Please. I went. She spotted me in the third row and smiled. Not a performance smile. A small, private one. Enough. Ryan kept his distance, which I took as a rare act of wisdom. Mutuals told me he was quieter these days. He'd learned that vendors talk and communities have memories. He'd also learned that you can't build a life on charm and expect it to hold weight. Whether that lesson would stick was his problem to solve. Dad never mentioned the watch again. Mom texted recipes as if comfort could be baked and mailed. I responded with thanks when I had the bandwidth. Sometimes love looks like sitting in separate rooms because the one you used to share taught you the wrong lessons. Work kept growing. I hired an associate who smiled like a person who meant it and terrified me with how fast she grasped nuance. I bought a new suit and wore it to meetings where people listened closely and took notes. I stopped apologizing for charging what my advice was worth. It turned out the world outside my family had been waiting to value me. I was the one who had to catch up. On a quiet Sunday, I pulled down a small box from the top of my closet. Inside sat the birthday candles Julia had bought last year, the sparklers that had hissed over a cake in a room full of empty chairs. I thought about throwing them away. I didn't. I put them back in the box and labeled it accurately Reminders. Then I opened a new document on my laptop and titled it Next Birthday. The list was short. Dinner at Marcello's. Invite the people who came last time without being asked. One table on purpose. No family messages, no group chat. A seat for Sophie if she wants it. A seat for me even if no one else shows. I sent a message to the Hendersons. Same plan as last year, but better company. They wrote back within minutes. Jim from accounting replied with a joke about reserving a seat for his terrible golf stories. Sarah from HR sent a photo of a decent bottle of wine. I smiled and added buy candles to the list. Not sparklers. Just candles. On the morning of my birthday, the house was quiet, in the right way. Sophie texted before school, "Happy birthday, Dad. See you at dinner." No emojis, no qualifiers. It was the best message I'd gotten in years. Marcello's felt warmer this time. Fewer chairs, brighter faces. We told stories worth telling. When the cake came, the song was still awkward, but it felt like honest singing does, imperfect and sincere. I made a wish I wasn't ashamed to say out loud. More of this. On the way home, I stopped at my parents' house unannounced again. The porch light was on. Dad opened the door. He looked older in a way that wasn't just about years. "Happy birthday," he said. "Thank you," I said. I reached into my pocket and placed a small box in his hand. Inside was a simple field watch I'd bought myself the week after the lodge collapsed. Nothing with a legacy. Something sturdy, accurate mine. "Keep the Omega," I said. "It belongs to the story you're telling. This one belongs to the life I'm building." He stared at the box, then at me, and nodded. I was wrong. He said the words so quiet I almost missed them. About fairness. About what you carry. I can't fix the past. I know I said. You don't have to. Just don't rewrite it. We stood there a moment, not quite hugging, not quite strangers. It was enough. When I got home, the house smelled faintly of frosting. On the table sat a small package with Sophie's handwriting on it. Inside was a braided keychain she'd made in a class I didn't know she was taking. The tag said, "For your office, so you don't lose the keys. Practical, thoughtful, not grand, perfect." I clipped it on my keyring and turned off the lights. In the dark, the quiet felt like something I had earned rather than something I'd been sentenced to. I thought about the watch again, and finally understood it had never been about owning time. It had been about who gets to decide how you spend it. I chose at last to spend mine with people who show up without being begged, who don't need rescue to call something a celebration, who don't require a casualty to recognize a contribution. People who don't wear what was meant for me because they understand I'm already wearing it. My name, my work, my boundaries, my peace. I locked the door, turned the deadbolt, and smiled at the quiet house that had finally learned my language. There's something strange about rebuilding your life while the old one is still standing a few streets away. From the outside, nothing had changed. My parents still lived in their house with the creaky porch swing. Ryan still bounced between half-formed ventures. Julia still moved through the kitchen making tea, though her eyes stayed somewhere far beyond the walls. But beneath all of it, the ground had shifted. I had drawn a line. They had tripped over it. And now we were all standing in the awkward silence after a curtain falls, but before the audience claps. At first, I thought distance would be the solution. Fewer calls, fewer dinners, just enough interaction to keep the machinery of obligation running. But life doesn't always let you fade away on your terms. Sometimes it drags you back for one more round. It started with Dad. One Saturday morning in late autumn, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, it was him. His voice was smaller than I remembered. "Your mother's at the hospital with chest pains," he said. "They think it's stress. Could you come?" Every instinct warred inside me. The son who'd spent his life fixing things wanted to grab his keys and drive straight there. The man who'd spent the last year untangling himself wanted to let it ring out to protect the peace he'd finally found. I went. Not for them, for myself. Because I needed to know I could show up without being swallowed again. The hospital room smelled of disinfectant and fear. Mom lay on the bed, pale but stable. When she saw me, tears spilled instantly. "I thought you'd given up on us," she whispered. I sat in the chair, folding my hands. I gave up on being taken for granted. That's different. She reached for me, frail fingers trembling. "We didn't mean." "Mom," I said gently, "you meant every choice. Maybe you didn't mean the consequences, but you meant the choices." Her hand fell back against the blanket. She closed her eyes, as if sleep could protect her from the truth. Ryan arrived 20 minutes later, out of breath, still dressed like he'd sprinted from some half-important meeting. He froze when he saw me. For once, he didn't grin, didn't swagger, didn't play the golden boy. He just nodded, almost sheepish, and sat on the other side of the bed. For a long while, we were quiet, listening to the steady beep of the monitors. It struck me that this was the first time in decades the three of us had shared a room without Mom narrating Ryan's triumphs or Dad comparing us like balance sheets. Finally, Ryan broke it. "I screwed up," he said softly, not looking at me. "The party, the watch, all of it. I wanted to win. I didn't think about what I was taking from you." The words were clumsy, but they were more than I'd ever heard before. I studied him, trying to decide if this was strategy or sincerity. Maybe both. But there was something in his posture, slumped shoulders, eyes rimmed red, that made me believe he was at least trying. "You didn't just take from me," I said. "You took from yourself, too. Every time you chase applause, you skip the work that earns respect." He flinched but didn't argue. That silence was the closest thing to growth I'd seen from him. When Mom was discharged later that afternoon, Dad pulled me aside in the hallway. His face looked older, softer somehow. "You were right," he said quietly. "About fairness. About us." We leaned on you because you made it easy. We celebrated Ryan because he made it dramatic. Neither was right. For a moment, I almost reached for him the way a boy reaches for his father. But then I remembered the years of Applebee's graduations, the decades of quiet dismissal. I just nodded. I know. On the drive home, the air smelled of rain. I rolled down the window, letting the cool wind sting my face. For the first time, I realized forgiveness didn't have to mean return. You can let go of anger without reopening the door. Julia was waiting when I walked in. She studied my expression. How was it? They're still them, I said. But maybe they see it now. And you? I set down my keys. I see me. That's enough. Her shoulders dropped like she'd been bracing for a fight that never came. You've changed, she said. I had to, I replied. And so do you if you want this to work. For weeks after we talked more honestly than we had in years. Sometimes it hurt. Sometimes it healed. But it was real. Sophie noticed. She started spending less time locked away, more time at the table, testing out jokes again, asking about my day. Life wasn't perfect. It wasn't supposed to be. What mattered was that it was mine, no longer dictated by a brother's charm, a parent's blind spots, or a wife's excuses. The Omega would always be Ryan's now. Let it be. I had something better, a clock inside me that finally ticked to my own rhythm. As winter settled in, I planned my next birthday quietly. Not with desperation, not with expectation, just with intention. I called Marcello's again, booked a table for 6, and invited only the people who had shown up before without obligation. Sarah Jim, the Hendersons. And Sophie, of course. If Julia came, fine. If she didn't, that was her story to live with. Mine was already moving forward. When the day arrived, I didn't look at my phone once. I didn't need to, because the only people who mattered were already at the table. And when the cake arrived simple, no sparklers this time, I closed my eyes, breathed in, and made the easiest wish I'd ever made. Not for more, not for less. Just for this. Winter gave way to a clear, spare spring. Work stayed steady, Sophie kept testing and trusting in equal measure, and the house learned our new rules. It was quiet the way a well-tuned engine is quiet, no knocks, no rattles, just forward motion. Then an envelope arrived with my parents' return address and Ryan's handwriting across the flap like a signature on a promise I hadn't asked for. Inside was an invitation printed on heavy cardstock. Johnson Family Foundation Launch Gala, honoring community unity and second chances. Keynote, Ryan Johnson, special recognition, our backbone, my full name. A date, a downtown hotel, a suggested dress code, and a list of founding sponsors at the bottom. My firm's logo was there. So was a quote under my name, family over everything. I hadn't given the logo. I hadn't given the quote. I hadn't given anything. 5 minutes later, my phone lit up. Mom, then Ryan, then Mom again. I let them go to voicemail and opened my laptop. The foundation website matched the invitation, glossy photos, a mission about youth development, a tab for sponsors. There I was again, my firm's mark pasted between 2 companies I knew couldn't stand late invoices. I sent a short, clean email to the site's contact address. You do not have permission to use my firm's name logo or implied endorsement. Remove them by 5 p.m. today. Confirm in writing. Then I forwarded the message to my attorney and to the hotel events manager listed on the press release. No threats, just facts. Julia read the invite at the kitchen island, lips pressed thin. He's trying to pull you on stage, she said. Make you the closing act. Not this time, I said. By noon, Ryan called again, and I answered. He led with charm that had lost its shine. Bro, it's for a good cause. You like good causes. We're repairing the narrative. You're trying to borrow credibility, I said. Use my name to clean a mess you made. Take my logo down. A beat. We already printed the programs. That's not my problem. You're really gonna do this? He asked, wounded, morphing into accusation. You'd rather embarrass the family than stand next to me for one night? I'd rather not be used, I said and hung up. At 4:37 p.m., I received a curt email from the foundation's generic address confirming they had removed my logo as a courtesy and to avoid misunderstandings. The site updated. The programs I knew were ink on paper. You can change a website in a minute. Paper tells on you, Mom called that evening. It would mean a lot if you came, she said softly. We're trying. He's trying. Trying looks like apologies before speeches, I said. Not after. Please, she whispered, and I heard hospital monitors in the pause. For me, I went, not as a sponsor, not as a prop, as a son who could walk into a room without surrendering himself at the door. The ballroom was all uplights and rented dignity. Round tables clothed in white centerpieces eager for compliments, a step and repeat for photos. The program laid at each seat had my name on page 3 under honorees. I picked up the booklet, folded it once, and slid it under my chair. People I recognized moved through the space with that half-smile reserved for pleasant gossip. A couple of vendors from Miguel's network stood near the bar, eyes sharp. The hotel manager clocked me from across the room and gave the tiniest nod. Julia arrived separately, careful, dressed simple. Sophie walked in with her scanning the room, then finding me. She slid into the seat to my right. You okay? She asked. I am, I said, surprised to find it true. Ryan took the stage to generous applause. He wore the omega, and his speech wore the phrasing of a crisis manager. Community. Second chances. Lessons learned. He gestured toward our parents who sat in front, soaking in the hope of a narrative reset. Then he shifted his stance, lowered his voice, and pivoted to the part he'd built the night around. My brother taught me more than I can say, he declared. He's the reason we're here. He's the reason I'm different. Tonight, I want to honor him. He raised a hand toward our table. A spotlight found me like a hand on the back of my neck. Come up, man, he said, smiling hard. Let me give you your flowers. Around us, heads turned, clapping rising cameras ready. Sophie's hand tightened on my sleeve. Julia watched me like a test proctor reading a clock. Mom leaned forward, willing me to stand. Dad's jaw was set in that old familiar line that meant he wanted this to work so badly he had decided it already did. I stayed seated. Applause staggered, then thinned. Ryan laughed into the microphone, bright and public. He's shy. Come on, let's nudge him up here. I stood then, but not to mount the stairs. I faced the room. Calm. No heat. No performance. Apologies belong in living rooms before they belong in ballrooms, I said loud enough to carry without a mic. I'm here as a guest, not as a prop. A hush settled, the kind that means everyone will remember what happens next for a very long time. Ryan's smile slipped, then snapped back. Absolutely. We've had our conversations. We haven't, I said. He looked to Mom for rescue. She lifted her palms helpless. Dad stared at the omega like it had something to say. The hotel manager took one step closer to the stage. Somewhere near the bar, a camera phone lowered the would-be video already ruined by honesty. I sat. The spotlight drifted off me like it had lost interest and went searching for someone more cooperative. Ryan stumbled through a patchwork of gratitude, then hurried to the band as if music could spackle over missing integrity. People clapped because they didn't know what else to do. The room exhaled shaky. During dinner, polite conversation tried to resurrect itself. It failed. Every table hummed with the same sentence left unsaid. That didn't go how he planned. The dessert course came and people pretended to enjoy it. When the band started again, couples swayed to prove the night wasn't broken. It was. On my way out, the hotel manager touched my elbow. Thank you for the heads up, she murmured. We adjusted our announcement language earlier. Professional. Precise. Not a drop more than necessary. In the corridor outside the ballroom, Dad caught up with me. You could have gone up, he said, not unkindly. Then we would have lied to everyone at once, I answered. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, weariness settling where certainty used to sit. You're right. Mom approached, eyes wet. I just wanted us in the same room again. We were, I said, and we told the truth in it. That's new. Sophie appeared at my side, slipping her hand into mine the way she used to when she was small. Can we go? She asked. We already are, I said, and we left. In the car, the city lights blurred past in quiet streaks. Sophie stared out the window, then spoke without turning. I was proud of you, she said. You didn't make a scene. You just said the thing. That's the job now, I said. Say the thing. No more scenes. Think he'll ever get it, she asked. I think he'll get what applause can't buy, I said. Whether he thinks that's worth anything is up to him. At home, I hung my jacket, put water on for tea, and stood a long minute in the doorway to my office. The keychain Sophie made spun slowly on its hook, catching light. On the bookshelf sat the small box that once held those sparkler candles. I opened it, held their thin metal stems in my fingers, then closed it and put it back. Reminders, not relics. My phone vibrated on the desk. A text from Ryan. You humiliated me. You had one job, support me. I typed deleted, then typed again. My job is to tell the truth. Support isn't silence. 3 dots pulsed, then disappeared. No reply. Another text came, different tone, different number. Dad, I heard you tonight. Come by this week, just you and me. No agenda. Okay, I wrote. Julia appeared in the doorway with 2 mugs. How bad is the fallout, she asked. As bad as reality, I said, accepting the tea, which is to say survivable. We sat on the couch without the TV. The house listened with us. After a time, she set down her mug. You didn't gloat. I don't need to win, I said. I just refuse to lose myself. She nodded. I can live with that. In the days that followed, the foundation posted careful photos, tight crops, no captions about honorees. The city blog ran a short piece on the event with a line at the end about sponsors declining to be listed. It was polite, and it was enough. Reputation doesn't need grand pronouncements to adjust. It needs accurate ones. When I met Dad later that week, he handed me a small envelope across the kitchen table. Inside was a photocopy of a service record from the Omega's last maintenance, dated the year before I graduated high school. On the back, in his square handwriting, I kept the wrong things running. I'm sorry. I folded the paper once and slid it back to him. You don't have to give me anything I said. Just don't ask me to stand in a story that isn't true. I won't, he said. Driving home, I realized part of me had been waiting for that sentence since I was 12. Spring settled into place. My practice hired another associate. Sophie passed her driving test on the second try and insisted on driving me to dinner to prove she could hold the wheel steady. Julia and I kept doing the work without pretending effort equals guarantee. It was enough. On a quiet evening, I wrote a single line on a sticky note and pressed it inside my wallet, where the Omega might have rested if life had gone another way. I didn't set out to win, I set out to stop losing myself. Every time I reached for a card or a receipt, it touched my fingers and reminded me of what was meant for me all along. Not a watch, not a stage, not a family's applause. Just a life I could stand in without being asked to perform. The thing about revenge is that it doesn't always come dressed in fire and brimstone. Sometimes it arrives in silence disguised as peace, and you only recognize it when you realize the weight is gone from your chest. That's how I felt in the weeks after Ryan's gala collapsed under its own pretense. There were no fireworks, no screaming matches, just a deep, steady calm. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for a phone call to tell me where I was needed. I wasn't checking my watch to see if my presence was required somewhere else. My life finally belonged to me. The fallout spread in quiet waves. Ryan tried to patch the story with half-truths and charm, but word had already traveled farther than he could reach. Sponsors quietly stepped back. Vendors whispered to each other about contracts unpaid. The foundation's website stayed online, but no one spoke of it again. The gala had been his grand stage, and he'd left it with the lights off and the audience gone. Mom kept calling her tone softer each time. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she said one afternoon, her voice fraying. Mom? I answered gently, it was always like this. We just stopped pretending. She sighed long and heavy. I wanted both my sons to shine. You can't shine by stealing someone else's light, I said. Ryan has to find his own. He always did. For once, she didn't argue. Dad was quieter, but when I saw him, he studied me with a new kind of respect, like he was finally recalibrating decades of assumptions. He didn't say much, but he didn't need to. Sometimes silence is an apology louder than words. Julia stayed close, watching me, perhaps testing if this version of me would fade back into the old one. But I didn't. I worked. I rested. I lived without apology. One night she asked, "Do you think we can reset too?" I thought about all the birthdays, the dinners, the years of being useful instead of loved. "We can try," I said, "but it only works if you see me now, Not just when you need me. She nodded, eyes wet. It wasn't a promise. It was a beginning. That was enough. Sophie became the quiet bridge. She asked more questions, spent more time at the table, less time hiding behind her phone. One evening, she surprised me by saying, "I saved one of your birthday candles from last year. Thought you might want it." She handed me the slim sparkler, bent slightly at the base but still intact. I held it like a relic. "Thanks, kid," I said. "That means more than you think." Life wasn't about erasing the past anymore. It was about standing in the present with clarity. And clarity has its own kind of revenge. When my next birthday came, I didn't send out mass invitations. I booked a small table again at Marcello's, just like before. This time I invited only the people who had chosen me when it counted Sarah, Jim, the Hendersons, and of course Sophie. Julia asked if she could come, and I told her yes if she came because she wanted to, not because she felt she had to. She showed up early, a simple dress, no distractions, no excuses. Sophie sat beside me, eyes bright. My friends filled the other chairs. No empty seats, no ghosts. The waiter brought out the cake, smaller, no sparklers this time. Just candles glowing steady in the dim light. They sang a little off-key but sincere. I closed my eyes, drew in a long breath, and made the easiest wish I'd ever made. Not for them to change, not for the past to rewind. I wished for this, a table filled by choice, not obligation. A life chosen by me, not dictated by others. When I opened my eyes, the faces around me weren't perfect, but they were real. And that was everything. Across town, Ryan no doubt was drafting his next plan, searching for another stage, another spotlight. Maybe one day he'd find it. Maybe he wouldn't. But it no longer mattered. Because I had already found mine. And for the first time in a long, long time, I smiled, not the brittle smile of survival, but the quiet, solid smile of a man who had finally come full circle.